Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
One of the cool things about the podcast is because our whole object is to give you actionable advice to use in your practice, we can touch on big subjects such as adding additional locations or long-term practice planning, as well as the day-to-day stuff, how to improve case acceptance or what to do about office drama. This week's episode is one of those day-to-day things. In last week's episode, we talked about the confirmations process and how, a lot of the finer arts of confirmation have disappeared over the last 20 years with the advent of all this technology, and how we're hearing more about cancellations and no-shows these days, and we told you what to do about it. So obviously when you do your confirmations process well, it can help you avoid most last-minute openings or patient no-shows, and if anything, if you do it well, it'll tell you with enough advance notice to fill the appointment. But even so, even if you do your confirmations process incredibly well, there are always going to be cases where you're going to have last-minute cancellations. Someone has a family emergency, someone got sick, and you find out the morning of. So when that happens on the hygiene schedule or the doctor's schedule, does your office have a specific replicatable procedure to fill these last-minute cancellations? Or does it become utter chaos? And maybe you've got a situation where one of your staff is really good at filling a last-minute opening and the rest aren't. And when we see that, normally what we see more often than not, of course, there's always going to be the person who's just not good at it no matter what you do. But more often than not, it's not the person, it's the fact that there isn't a standard procedure or system that's supposed to be followed when it needs to be handled. So building on last week's topic, in this week and next week's episode, we're going to be covering specific procedures or techniques or steps, for lack of a better word, you can use to fill last-minute openings. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about the hygiene schedule, specifically 9 steps to filling a last-minute opening. Next week, we're going to talk about the doctor's schedule. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And keep in mind, again, I know I just talked about this. As I go through this assumes you've got a decent confirmation system. If you don't, listen to last week's episode, because filling last-minute openings successfully can become labor-intensive. So you don't want to walk in having to fill, 6 last-minute openings. Ideally, you want to limit this to 1 or 2. And as a guide, I've got a free download that you can use to follow along or use to formulate your own office policy for this, and it's called 9 Steps to Filling a Last-Minute Opening. This policy comes from our online platform, DDS Success. It's actually from the Scheduler Training course. And, shameless plug here, if you want to find out more about DDS Success, I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage, as well as the link for the download of this policy. And for Dental Business RX listeners, we have a special coupon code. Normally it's $289 a month, and that includes the doctor and 10 staff. The coupon code is for $269 a month. It's RX269. It'll be right on there on the episode webpage. Anyway, the idea behind this policy or procedural list, let's say, is to provide a replicatable system and sequence that anybody can be trained to do. And it's been distilled from things that we found to be successful. All right, so let's dive into this. You've done your confirmations and you're about to leave for the day, and you notice tomorrow's hygiene schedule is fully confirmed. Then you come in the next morning at 7:30 and there's a voicemail, a text, or an email saying that your 2 o'clock hygiene patient can't come. They just cannot come. So what's next? All right, so this is where I'm going to go through the steps, but keep in mind a couple things. One, the steps have to be done quickly. Okay, they have to be done quickly, and you have to make sure that, because sometimes people will just go off and start calling patients without their chart up on screen where they can see relevant data. Obviously, they should have their chart handy when they're calling anybody. That should just be an office policy. If you're talking to a patient, even if they call you, you should pull up their chart, number 1. Number 2, if the patient has dental insurance, you have to be very careful. You can't pull somebody in early, 5 months and 3 weeks after their last cleaning, or it's not going to be covered by insurance. So that's a thing. If they're not insured, 5 months and 3 weeks isn't that big of a deal. But then again, if someone's not due for 3 months, even though they don't have insurance, I'm still not going to call them in early, because why would I do that, right? But okay, so, and then obviously you're working against time. This all has to be done fast. Today's the most important day. Tomorrow's the next most important day, and so on. But that works for the day itself. So if I have an appointment that I'm trying to fix at 11, that is going to be higher priority than when I'm trying to fix at 2 p.m. because time is ticking as I'm going through all of this. So in our little scenario here, we have an opening at 2 p.m. So what do we do? So step one, first place we're going to look to fill this last minute opening, and this is a lot easier than you think, and most people don't do this, is at the doctor's schedule. In a lot of cases, and I challenge you to do this, have a look at your doctor's schedule every day and take a look at how many of those patients are due or near due or slightly overdue for a cleaning. You'd be surprised. You'll find 1, 2, 3 people. It's something that we find routinely. So you take a look at the doctor's schedule. Ideally, we're looking for somebody who's coming in around the time of the openings. The doctor has a 1 o'clock and the opening is at 2. Okay, good. We can call this patient and tell him, hey, do you mind sticking around after you see the doctor to have your teeth cleaned? Right? Easy. Very, very easy to sort out. Or maybe they're seeing the doctor at 3 and our opening is at 2. We could call them and see if they want to come in a little bit early and get their teeth cleaned. Obviously, we're making sure, that if they have dental insurance, that we're not calling them in early at 6 months and a day later than their last cleaning, right? If they're not insured, if it's 5 months and 28 days, it's probably not that big of a deal. We can get them to just switch. They may already be scheduled even, right? This is something to look at. You might have somebody scheduled to see the doctor today and scheduled on Hygiene a week from now or 2 weeks from now that fits within this. But in a lot of cases, you'll find people who just don't have their next Hygiene visit that you could slide right into that 2 o'clock opening. All right, so we've glanced through the schedule fast and nobody fits that bill. All right, what do we do next? Next area we're going to look at is the Hygiene schedule itself. So I would start with, ideally, somebody, let's say we have somebody and they're getting scaling and root planing and it's 2 appointments. And I know that the hygienists out there are going to probably hate me for this. But let's say we have a patient scheduled at 1 for 2 quads of scaling and root planing, and it's their first 2 quads. They have 2 more quads to go. We might call that patient and ask, do you mind sticking around an extra hour and getting the whole thing done? In a lot of cases, they would prefer to do that because they're getting numbed up. They may as well get all numbed up and just get the whole thing knocked out, right? The hygienists may not love it because they don't want to do 2 scalings in a row, but that's always a potential option. Another potential option, although this is a little dicier, is let's say we have a new patient, and in our office, the new patients don't always get a cleaning depending on the severity of what's going on, with their oral health. There's always a chance we could, if that new patient needs a prophy, we could just have the hygienist continue and do the prophy after the doctor does the exam. Or, and this is a little dicier, if they need the beginning of perio, we could possibly start perio, but that's not something we can guarantee because we haven't seen the new patient yet. But this is something to keep in your hip pocket if you can't fill that last minute opening. Ideally, I'm looking for a patient that's already there that I could extend the appointment if possible. So let's say we've looked and there's nothing there that fits that bill. Where am I moving to next? Well, this is where, and some offices have this and some don't. I have my, some people call it their last minute cancellation list or their ready list or something like this. This is a list of patients that I've been cultivating over some time who can come in earlier if needed or have more flexible schedules. I just keep this around, or you could keep a list like this, or you could know it in your head. I prefer having it as a list. I have somebody who's got a fairly open schedule, and they're scheduled next week for a prophy, and it still they don't have dental insurance. I can easily just call them in. Or it's somebody that does have dental insurance, and it still wouldn't mess up this whole 6-month thing. I could get them in and just, move them up. Maybe they're scheduled or not scheduled. I can get them in that day. That's my quick call list, so to speak. Let's say I've looked at my quick call list and there's nobody on there that I can call. Where do I go next? Well, some offices also have what I've heard it called the executive list. It's kind of a nice way of saying, patients who are inconsistent about keeping their schedule list, but they call it the executive list to be nice. Pull out my executive list. This is a patient who hasn't been keeping their hygiene appointments. I've been looking to fit them in somewhere. I can call them that morning and see if they can take the opening. All right. It's good to cultivate these lists and have them handy. You can keep them in a spreadsheet. You can keep them in a pad, wherever you want to keep them. But it's good to have to be able to call these people quickly. All right. Then, obviously, as all of this is going on, depending on how long this is taking me, this is why this has to go quickly. I'm also looking at the possibility of moving my 3 o'clock up to 2 and my 4 o'clock up to 3, right? I'm starting with moving my 3 o'clock person up to 2 because then now I have a 3 o'clock opening instead of a 2 o'clock opening, if that's possible. Depending on how long these earlier actions take you, you may have to do that at some point. Obviously, if I find somebody on the doctor's schedule, I can just switch over and not have to do any of that. But if it's getting to the point where I don't have a specific person, I've exhausted my quick call and executive list, and there's nobody in the practice that day that I can take to take that 2 o'clock opening, now I'm going to start playing with today's schedule a little bit to move that opening further down in the day. The next thing that I could do is I could start looking at tomorrow's schedule, the day after, etc. Ideally, see if I'm going to look ideally at the same or similar time. So if today's Tuesday at 2 o'clock, I have my opening, I'm going to look at tomorrow at 2 o'clock, the day after at 2 o'clock, again, keeping the whole insurance concept in mind. I can't, if the person scheduled for tomorrow at 2 o'clock is 6 months and a day, I can't move them to today. So I have to know this. If they're uninsured, it's no problem. I can call them. I ideally want to start looking around the same times because, generally people tend to make appointments when it's easiest for them to keep, either by the day or by the time. I could always call patients coming tomorrow morning if none of those patients could fit into today's slot, but I would start by looking at tomorrow at 2, the day after at 2, etc., to move them up, okay? The other thing, too, is if I do this and I pull tomorrow's 8 o'clock patient, well, now I'm looking for an 8 o'clock patient tomorrow morning. I'm constantly trying to buy myself some time. All right. So let's say I've done all of this and I still have not filled my 2 o'clock opening, which now should be a 3 or a 4 o'clock opening because I've compressed the rest of the hygiene schedule, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Maybe, my 3 o'clock patient is someone who's on the dentist's schedule, child, their son is in hygiene while they're getting seen by the doctor. I can't move them from 3 to 2 at that point. Right. So I'm either going to have my 2 o'clock opening or I'm going to have a 3 or 4 o'clock because I've been compressing things throughout the day. But let's say I've done all these steps. I've gone through the first 5 steps, which is looked at the doctor's schedule, the hygiene schedule. I've looked at my ready or last minute list, my executive list. I've looked at the hygiene schedule for tomorrow, the day after, etc. And I still can't fill this opening. What am I going to do next? Well, now I'm going to look at recent cancellations and no-shows to see if one of these folks could fill that slot. Now, ideally, a recent cancellation should have been rescheduled. They should have been rescheduled, but, there really is no but. They should have been rescheduled. That being said, even if they were rescheduled, they're not rescheduled for today. They're probably rescheduled for next week. So those folks, since I know for a fact they already missed an appointment, they're not overdue, those folks will probably be easier to see if I can bring into this 2 o'clock slot. I also have people who haven't got their next hygiene appointment scheduled, in which case, I'm just going to, they canceled or they no-showed. I'm going to see if I can fit them into that 2 o'clock slot. So again, let's say I've done that, right? Done that. Recent cancellations and no-shows. I'm on step 6 here. Still have not filled that opening. Where am I going to go next? Now I'm going to just call my currently due recall list, preferably not my long overdue list. I'm looking at people that are due this month or the previous month that don't have an appointment. So I'm going to generate a list of patients that were due for hygiene. Let's say this is June. I'm going to look at patients that were due for hygiene in May that did not have a hygiene appointment, or maybe patients that are due this month that do not have a hygiene appointment. Again, if it's a this month thing, I'm going to have to be careful with that insurance thing. If they have dental insurance, if they were due last month, it should be fine. I should be able to, fit them into that slot. Okay. So again, I've done that. I've compressed the schedule. I've exhausted all of this. What am I going to do next? Well, most likely at that point, and chances are there's no way, in addition to whatever else you're doing, unless this is your full-time job, that you've been able to exhaust the entirety of the currently due list. There's probably at least, 200 patients, I would suspect, that were due this month, last month, or even the month before that have not come in. So that's going to take you a while to get through that list, and you may or may not fill the opening. But let's say you don't have that problem. Let's say everybody who was due this month, last month, and the month before has an appointment or is being seen, right? And I can't move them, and I've somehow gotten through the whole list. What am I going to do next? Now I'm going to call the overdue reactivation list. And this is sort of the worst case scenario if I don't fill the opening. So you go, well, why would you do that? Well, here's my take on it. And this is my take on it doesn't just apply to hygiene openings. If I do all this activity I've just described to you, I've called all these people, I've I've called the overdues. I've called the executive list. I've called the currently dues. I've called the ready list. I've called everybody. Chances are I've probably, if I haven't filled today's opening, I've still scheduled a lot of hygiene appointments, most likely. I called the overdue person, or maybe not overdue is the right word, but maybe somebody who was due last month and didn't have an appointment. They can't come in today at 2, but they'd like to come in, and I schedule them for 2 weeks from now at 3. I've probably scheduled 10, 15, 20 hygiene visits while I've been ripping through this whole list, assuming I couldn't handle this early on. Assuming I got through this whole list, now I'm moving to the recall, reactivation, overdue list. These are people that are well overdue. And again, I'm just at that point trying to generate more appointments, or I might go back to what I'm doing and we're just going to have to eat it on the opening somehow. But, okay, I didn't fill that one opening, but I scheduled another 10, 12, 15 appointments. So all in all, it wasn't a terrible day. I've definitely avoided future openings that were on the schedule, and I've actually created a little bit more hygiene activity in that sense. And this is why, we talk about this. I've talked about it in prior episodes. It's important, depending on the size of your hygiene department or how many patients you have in your patient base. This might be something that needs a lot more work than you think it does. If I've got 2, 3, 4,000 patients, that's potentially 8,000 recalls a year, which in a given year, that's 100 and some per week. That's 10, 12, 15 days of hygiene. So to keep that full consistently, it might not be a bad idea to task somebody with that full time, because part of what happens when you start having openings in hygiene, is not only is it it's a problem. You got this big opening, you're paying a hygienist to be there, and there's nobody there. That's usually the point that we see that upsets us the most. But what we're missing is, number one, when that's happening, our patient base is starting to go, even if it's happening slowly, inactive. And 2, where do you think most treatment comes from on the doctor's schedule? It comes out of hygiene. It's not all coming from new patients unless you're a specialist. So this is something I would want to keep hygiene maximally full at all times and continuously growing, because that's going to contribute to overall practice growth. So here's what I would recommend. Those are the 9 basic steps, and you can download the policy on this to take a look at it. But what I would recommend in your practice is, just like I said with the confirmation policy last week, is if you have somebody who's innately good at this in your practice, maybe it's your office manager, maybe it's your scheduler, maybe it's both, sit down and meet with them. You can use this list as a guide and it's a Word doc. You can edit it to your heart's content. Create your own policy that works for your practice. It's not difficult to do if somebody knows what they're doing. And then you have a standard procedure to follow when this happens in the future. And it's something that you can actually train somebody on in the office, or as your office scales, or as you add new staff. Anyway, bit of a shorter episode this week, a bit more day-to-day type stuff. I was a little all over the place, but I apologize for that, but it's needful, and I hope it helps. As I mentioned, I have that link in that coupon code to DDS Success, as well as that downloadable on the episode webpage. And if you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week. I'll see you at the next week's episode, where we talk about the doctor's schedule, and it's more than just the process. There's a little bit more to it as far as how things are sold. Otherwise, have a great week. We'll see you at the next episode.